Hey guys, it's Michael. Welcome back to my YouTube channel and welcome to a new video. Today we will talk about a hidden champion exercise, and if you want to know which exercise you can integrate in your training to improve all 4 competition lifts, stay tuned for the video. And that hidden champion exercise that we are going to talk about today are glute bridges and its variations. And if you didn't know, now you know that we are offering calisthenics and weighted calisthenics online coaching. So if you are interested in learning impressive bodyweight skills like planches, handstand push-ups, front levers, or attending a weighted calisthenics competition, then you should definitely schedule your free consulting call for our online coaching, and then we will help you to make sustainable gains, get rid of your discomforts, learn the movement patterns correct, and just progress with a lot of fun. So I hope to see you in the consulting call soon. Now let's start to understand why the glute bridges can be helpful for all 4 competition lifts. And the first component that will be very helpful is that the glute bridge will help us to extend our hip better with the help of our hamstrings. The hamstrings are a biarticular muscle, so they're crossing 2 joints, the hip joint and the knee joint, and they're running from the sit bone area to the tibia here or to the fibula on the outside. It's a muscle group containing of 3 muscles which are responsible for bending the knee, for, show it here, extending the hip, and also very important for internal and external rotation of the tibia, which makes bending and extending of the knee joint possible. Let's start with the advantages of the glute bridges for our upper body lifts. And to understand these, we need to understand some more complex relationships in the human body. So the glute bridge will help us to use our hamstrings, here, the hamstrings, in order to extend the hip. So when we are having more posture like this, like kind of that sway back, hollow back posture, then the hamstrings via the glute bridge can help us to rotate the pelvis so that this hip joint is more extended. That will bring our pelvis in a more neutral position, which means we can stack it better. So our rib cage and the pelvis can be more stacked. And that is a position which generates less power leaks if we're dipping or pulling, because we can really keep our part of the spine here more rigid, as we can activate our side abs better, which will pull the ribs and the hips closer together in that stack. So being able to fully extend the hip will make your pull up, muscle up, and dip more efficient. To which degree, of course, I cannot tell, depends on how bad you are at extending the hip in first place, but it is definitely a very, very helpful feature if you lack in hip extension in the first place. What also happens is that if we are able to stack better, so to bring our pelvis in a neutral position and to use our side abs, our obliques, to create that stack, is then when we are breathing in, the air will fill up the upper part of the rib cage and not use the lower ribs, the floating ribs, to create space in here. And what happens is, if we can create expansion on the upper portion of our rib cage, the scapula can move much more efficient into upward, downward rotation and protraction, retraction to scapula, internal and external rotation, which will also make the force coupling and movement for your arms, so for pull-ups, chin-ups, dips, again, much more efficient. So working on extending the hip has an indirect effect on how you can properly move your rib cage, and so the scapula, and so the upper arm. When we think about squatting, the glute bridge can be very helpful as well, because when we are able to better use the hamstrings to extend the hip when we're starting the squat, then this pelvis moves more in this direction, so in a more neutral position, and the hamstrings are not as lengthened by it, so they are more in a short position. Now, if we are then going into a hip flexion like that, the hamstrings have more room, as there's now more hip flexion available, in order to internally rotate the tibia. This will help us to generate more knees over toes and get a much more efficient, decent movement on the squat. So if you ever had the feeling that you were not able to get good knees over toes, that there is a blocking feeling in your knee, that you're getting some discomfort in the patella joint, patella tendon or quad tendon region on the inside here mostly, then this could be an origin of that problem, because your knee is not able to rotate in the first place because your squat hip position starts off. So the glute bridge will help you to have a better starting position, and so giving you more range of motion to move into tibial internal rotation and then external rotation once you're standing up, creating a much more efficient movement pattern. Now let's talk about some execution details of the glute bridge. We're starting with the most easiest version of the glute bridge, where we do it with both legs on a bench or on a box. What we want to do is we go in a 90-90 position, so roughly 90 degree in the hip joint and roughly 90 degree in the knee joint. We push our heels more with the inside of our heels gently into the bench, so that we feel a slight sensation in our hamstrings. So they're just activating. And we're not doing it like that, but we pull our toes to the knees, gentle pressure. Then you lay your head on the floor in order to keep the airways open. Now, tension to get the pelvis in a neutral position. And then the next step, we want to have a big long exhale through our mouth in order to set our obliques under tension, to bring the ribs down. Let me show that to you. So that would be regular, and now I'm breathing out until my obliques are under tension here. And then we keep that tension, and while we're now extending our hip through our hamstrings, so we don't arch the lower back and we don't squeeze our glutes. We use the hamstrings, we breathe in through the nose. And then on top, you will feel a nasty contraction in mostly your inner thighs here. You try to extend your hip through the hamstrings. So you don't arch, you don't squeeze the glutes and push the knees to the side. You really keep them parallel. You keep pulling on the toes, you keep your stack, and you push through the hamstrings. Important details. And then on the way down, set your obliques again, and then breathe in. Now, if you are a bit stronger and you want to have it more as a working exercise and not as a warm-up exercise before your squat, you can do the following. You are going to do that in a unilateral fashion. So you take one leg off the box, we're now working on the right leg, and I will bring the left leg in the end range of hip flexion so that I can comfortably hold it. So I don't want to push it, I don't want to feel any of these muscles here on the side hip turning on. I just want to have it in a comfortable end range. And then I repeat that. So, setting my stack and then extending the hip while breathe in through the hamstring. And you will feel it's much harder, of course, as you're doing it in a unilateral fashion. Once you're comfortable with that setup, what you can do in order to help promote breathing mechanics is that if you're doing it unilateral, on the side where you have the leg extending the hip, you reach the shoulder on top, and on the opposite side, you place your hand on the floor like that in order to promote your oblique activity and in order to help for your upper rib cage to be able to expand. Like that. I can already see that nasty contraction here in my hamstring. Feels great. And now we're going into the end level, so the hardest variation of this glute bridge, and this will be done on the rings. What you're doing is, if you're doing it single leg, you place your Achilles tendon in the ring like that, which will automatically promote this, what is it, plantar flex position, so when you pull your toes towards the knee. And why is it harder? Because the rings will allow your knee to open. So you must keep more tension in your hamstrings and in your calf muscles in order to keep that knee at 90 degrees, which makes the exercise much harder on the rings. And then setting up the position, we breathe out, set our obliques, and then we extend the hips through our hamstrings, and again, not through the lower back, not through the glutes, but through the hamstrings. You will feel it's very, very difficult, but also very nice exercise. Let's talk about who should give this exercise a try. And the first group of athletes who can definitely benefit from an exercise like this are athletes which will present with a natural hollow back shape. So as you can see, if I'm standing comfortable, I have more those extended knees and I stand in that slight hollow back position. So my natural pelvis orientation will be slightly anterior. So by doing the glute bridges and this breathing work frequently, that can help me to just gain access to this hip extension range of motion in order to be able to create a neutral hip position and so later a proper stack for my upper body lifts and also a better hinge and a better knee bending for my squats. The second group of athletes who can benefit from the glute bridges are athletes that are having trouble to go into a stacked position with dips. So if you're prone to that hollow back position on the way down as well on the way up, but your technique seems to be actually pretty good, then it can be very helpful to do those glute bridges as a pre-activation exercise in order to be able to get into that hip extended position. Now the same becomes much more obvious if we are in an overhead position, like in a chin-up or in a pull-up. Because if we are overhead and we don't have the best overhead mobility, it will automatically bring us in this hyperextended position and create even more of that anterior tilt. So especially for athletes like that, which have a high chance to not be able to breathe into their upper rib cage in order to create scapular upward rotation to unlock overhead mobility, the glute bridge can be a great first step in order to create the mechanics that we need to gain access to these ranges in first place. So if you are hanging like that and you are forced in that arch position, and then you also need to pull first in that arch before you can close your chin up or pull up, then the glute bridges can also be a nice addition to your workout routine. Last but not least, the muscle up, especially when we are using our step in technique, we want to be able to rotate our hip posterior and we want to keep our lower back in a neutral position. And this is also much easier if we have access to full hip extension. So there the glute bridge could help. So if you are swinging in and it always pulls you in that hollow back position, independently on how hard you try to avoid it, you're probably missing out on a bit of hip extension here either. So the glute bridge can help in order to stay stacked here and to be able to maintain a proper hip position during the pulling phase of your muscle up. Let's put a bit of an importance rank to that exercise. This exercise can be a game changer if it's done frequently and if it's done correctly. Because what it does is, as mentioned 100 times already, is it helps to teach your body to use the hamstrings in order to move the hip more in extension, which will then help to promote better knee bending and extending, as the hamstrings now and the hip have more range in order to promote tibial internal and external rotation, and it helps to set the hips for better breathing and bracing mechanics for your upper body. So it is an indirect effect that you will feel, especially for the squats, immediately, but for your upper body lifts, it's a very slow improvement process. So you don't really feel an immediate change once you start to incorporate the exercise, and it's just a first step in a sequence of several exercises that will help you to promote better breathing and bracing mechanics. But all in all, the modified glute bridges, so all the versions that we saw here, are a very powerful tool in order to create a much more efficient movement pattern for all of your competition lifts. So definitely give it a try if you fall into the group of athletes that I just named.